subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV.
Nerds, welcome once again to Junior High School Hour on Joy Learning TV. I am your facilitator, Isaac Ohinamankwa, and I'm going to take you through ICT. Well, the last week and the weeks before, I know you had a wonderful time with me. Well, let's take our pens, our books, and sit down, and let's put some few things down, and let's see where the right takes us. Okay, today we are going to talk about basic input and output devices. Basic input and output devices. These are devices that you are very well familiar with, but let's try and group them into their perspective areas. So at the end of our lesson, we should be able to identify the types of basic input devices and also the types of basic output devices, and also their functionalities. Not all input devices, but the basic ones, and also input devices as a general and output devices as a general. Now, when you were in Form 1 or a year back, you learned about IPC, which is Information Processing Cycle. Now, I want to ask you once again, what is Information Processing Cycle? What is information processing cycle? Well, I can see what you're writing down is information processing cycle is what? The process through which data passes through to become what? Information. And it's very simple as that. And when we learned about information processing cycle, we were given a diagram. Now, if you look on the slide over here, you realize that I have my diagram here. I have it right here. And on this diagram, we have our input. That is the first stage. Then it moves towards the processing. That's the second stage. Then the output. Third stage. Now, the fourth stage is normally optional. It can be what? Storage or distribution. Some even have it for 5 stages. I intentionally grouped the storage and what? Distribution into one stage. So today, our lesson, we are going to focus on the ones I've circled. That is the input and the what? Output device. Now, the processing itself has its own device for that, and that is very simple. We know it's the system unit. But when it comes to the input and output, if you are in the technological world, you realize that there are a whole lot of what? Devices that fall within what? The input and the outputs. Okay, so in the first place, what are input devices? These are devices used to send data into the computer. I said what? They are devices used to send what? Data into the computer. And I know most of you will be asking yourself, what is data? Those who are not familiar with IPC, that's Information Processing Cycle. Well, data is raw, let's say unorganized text or pictures. It could be anything in any form. They are raw information which have been put together. When they go through the process, then it becomes information. Because what is information for me might be what? Data for another person. So information processing cycle doesn't end. It really what? Goes in a cycle way, in a cycle. So we also say that what? These are devices or equipment used to provide data and control signals to an information processing system. We'll explain that. Such as computer or information appliances. Okay, so we are saying that what? These are devices that are used to what? Provide data. They would provide what? Data. So as I said, what is data for me might be information for another person. So it uses what? Provide data and control signals towards an information processing system. And we said with our personal computers, when we talk about our processing system, we are talking about what? The system unit. So the third definition says what? An input device is any hardware device that sends data to a computer, allowing you to interact with what and control it. So it's simply saying that what? When data is inputted into the computer, it's the device, or the device which is the input device, is sending what we call a human language or a human recognizable language into the computer, where in the processing will turn it into what we call a machine language. So basically, input devices are devices that send what? Data. So their main and primary purpose is to send data for processing. Okay, now let's look at some types of input devices. So when we talk about the input devices, as we said, they send data, they send signals. When you take your computer and you type in, you have sent a message. Now, this is what happens. In human language, we see A, B, C, D. But in computer language, what they see is what we call the zeros and the ones, or the off and the ons. These zeros and ones are also known as what? Off and ons. Now, the character A could be 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So let's say 0. This you see over here could be letter A. I'm not saying it is letter A. It could be letter A, which simply says on, off, on, off, 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 on, off. That's what the computer understands. When it's brought to our human language or our human form, we see the letter what? A. So, examples of this input devices include the barcode scanner. Well, I know you have visited the malls, the shopping centers, and even some drugstores or pharmacies. When you get there, there is this device that is used to scan the barcode of the drug or whatever you have bought, and the price is what? Then inputted into the computer automatically, because it has been configured with what? The computer. So this barcode reader forms is a form of what? Input device. It takes information into what? The computer. We have audio conversion devices. Audio conversion devices. We also have biometric scanners. Biometric scanners. Those of you who had the privilege to register for the Ghana card, you were taken through the biometric registration process, where your fingerprints were taken, your images were taken. I remember the iris that was taken, the iris was scanned. So these are all biometric features, and this information, when taken, goes straight into the computer for processing. Okay, then we have the digital camera and the camcorders, like what I am being taken, the video up there, which is being taken right now, is taken from what? A video camera, which is also an example of what? An input device. We also have the game pads, the joysticks. We have the game pad and the joysticks. These are all examples of what? Input devices. We have the keyboard, which is the most common one we are all familiar with. Those who are not familiar with, don't worry. You see an example of a keyboard. And we have the magnetic strip reader. The magnetic strip reader is mostly found, okay, I would say an example is our metering system. Some people have a card which has a black tape behind it, and this tape, when is shown to the meter, our electricity meter, we realize that it picks the information, and then the credit that we have bought for our prepaid meters starts what? Reading. So that's an example of what? A magnetic strip reader. We also have microphones. Microphones. I don't know, we all know microphones. We have the mouse, the touchpad. We have light pens like the one I'm using. It's an example of what? An input device. The light pen. Some people call it the stylus. Either stylus or light pen or pen, they are all one and the same. Okay, we also have scanners. Then we have the remote control. The remote control you use at home. These are all examples of what? Input devices. Remember, when you key in channel 1, it moves to what? The channel you want. Okay, we have the touch screen. For mobile phones, we have touch screens. For other tablets and even some modern laptops have touch screens retrofitted on their screens. And we also have voice capturing devices. And we also have the one last thing is what? The OMR. That's the optical mark reader. Now, the optical mark reader. The information here is that the OMR itself is not an input device. That is why we have reader. The OMR itself is not an input device because it contains data. But the reader interprets the card. That's why we are saying what? The OMR. That's what? Optical mark reader. The reader is rather what? The input device. So it what? Interprets the data on the card for you. So the OMR, that's the card reader, the mark reader is the what? Input device. Now let's look at our basic or our personal computer. And when we're talking about personal computer, we are going to limit it to our desktop. Our desktop. That is where we have our monitor, our system unit, we have our mouse and our keyboard, and sometimes other peripherals like the printer and computer speakers, which all make up what? A personal computer. So this a picture of what? A personal computer. We have our monitor here. We have our printer. Our printer is being circled, which is more of a peripheral than what? Part of the personal computer. So now, from this place, we are going to identify, or we're going to use these as our basic input and output devices. So the basic input and output devices we are going to talk about is going to come from this picture. That is the printer, the monitor. Then we talk about the keyboard and the mouse. You realize that I've circled some and I've rather drawn a rectangle or a square around some of them. I've intentionally done that so that we don't confuse ourselves. Now, the printer and the monitor are all what we call output devices. Then the keyboard and the mouse falls under what? Input device. Someone will say, what about the system unit? Well, for your information, remember when we started, I mentioned that when we are dealing with information processing cycle, it goes through what? Input, then processing, then it comes to what? Output. Before the output to appear, it has to go through what? The system unit, where we have our processor in there. So the system unit, or what some people will call it, the CPU, but please remember, CPU is not the same as what? System unit. For time past, people have used it interchangeably, but they are not the same. CPU stands for what? Central Processing Unit. It's a device within the system unit. So the system unit is what? Our processing house. Then we have our keyboard and mouse to be our what? Input device. Then it goes through this way. Then the system unit allows us to view or display them on what? The monitors. Now, let's take the first input device, which is the keyboard. Now, basically, we have a lot, or let's say we have different types of keyboards, but basically, we're going to talk about two. One is the QWERTY keyboard, and we have another which is called the DOVAC keyboard. Now, with the QWERTY keyboard, we have ones which have 108 keys. We have some which have more than 108 keys. Some which have less than 108 keys. So we call some the standard keyboard. We have the advanced keyboard. and some are even called the multimedia keyboard. Yes, multimedia keyboard. So, as I was saying, we call all these keyboards the QWERTY keyboard. Why do we call them the QWERTY keyboard? We call them the QWERTY keyboard because it takes its name after the first line of what? Alphabetic keys. We will have a picture of it very soon, don't worry. So it says keyboard is one of the basic input device which is used to send text-based data into the computer. The common keyboards we see is the QWERTY keyboard, but there are other keyboard types like the Dovac named after the owner. It's rather unfortunate the creator of the QWERTY keyboard didn't name the keyboard after himself, but Dovac was named after a man called Michael Dovac. So let's look at an example of the Dovac. I have the Dovac keyboard in white and the QWERTY keyboard in ash. Now, if you look at the Dovac keyboard very well, you realize that the keys on top we are the numbers, which are the same for what? The QWERTY keyboards. So we call them what? The numeric key. Sorry, we call those places the alphanumeric keys because they are part of the alphabetic keys. So, but the Dovac has not got the numeric keypad. They are not having the numeric keypad. And you realize that the first line of alphabets, when we look at the QWERTY keyboard, is QWERTY. But when it comes to the Dovac, it starts with a question mark, a backslash, greater than, a comma, and so on. Before we have what? A P, Y, F, G, C. So you realize that the key arrangements are quite different when it comes to what? The Dovac keyboard layout. So now let me go a little bit into the keyboard arrangement. When we look at the QWERTY keyboard, which is the normal keyboards that we all use, we have 5 basic parts of the QWERTY keyboard. 5 basic parts of the QWERTY keyboard. The first one is the numeric keypad, which looks more or less like a calculator. The numeric keypad, which looks more or less like a calculator. Then we can have the F1 to F12, which is what? The function keypad. The function keypad. So that's why it have F1, which means function 1. So they all have their functionalities too. Then from that place, beneath the function keypad, we have where we have the numbers, alphabets, and other keys mixed all together. We call it the alphanumeric keypad. The alphanumeric keypad. Then we have in between the alphanumeric keypad and the numeric keypad, we have what we call the arrow keys, where we have arrow keys which are 4 in number, one showing up, the other down, one to the left and the other to the right. So that is our arrow keys or arrow keys. Let's keep it like that. Then we have the last one. Some people call it the special keys. Others call it the screen editing keys. The screen editing keys, where we have insert, home. We have insert, home, page up, page down, delete, end. These are keys we can use when we are even typing or editing a text. Okay, so these are what the 2 main keyboards, the keypads that we can talk about. There are other ones which I said, which in later years we'll talk about it. Now let's go to the next one, which is a mouse. A mouse. Now a mouse is a pointing device used to make inputs by clicking and commanding or drawing images. Yes, mouses can be used to draw images. Now, lest I forget, this light pen stylus I have here is also acting as a mouse. It can also act as a mouse. So we are saying that a mouse is a pointing device used to make input by clicking on commands or drawing images. You can bear with me that when we double click on any icon, what we are doing is we are launching the icon. So we have just issued a command by clicking. That is why we call the mouse as an input device. Now, the one who invented the mouse is called Doug Engelbart. Doug Engelbart. Now, there are 14, there are even more, depending on the purpose of that mouse. There are more than 14 types of mouse. The last time I checked, there are more than 14 types of mouse. And one of them, the two most common one we know or we have used or come across before is our optical and the rollerball type of mouse. The optical and the rollerball type of mouse. Now, with these two main or two basic input devices, let's go to an output device is. You know what an input device is? Let's put them into two syllables, which is in and put, which means we are putting something inside. So when we say output, it simply means we are bringing something out. So what are we bringing out? Well, an output device simply is a device that displays information after it has gone through, after the data has gone through the processing cycle. So we say an input device can be defined as a device that displays information, as devices that displays information. An example is your computer, your phone screens. Well, your phone screens can serve as both an input and an output device, because you can view or it communicates to you in human form or human language form. And you can also send commands by touching. Remember, we said one of the input devices is touch screens. And most of the phones that we have today, be it an Android phone or an Apple phone, they all have what we call touch screens. So another definition can be said that an output device is any piece of computer hardware equipment which converts information into human readable form. Into human readable form. Human readable form. It can be text, graphics, tactile. Put that in your head. Tactile, audio, and video. Someone will ask, what is tactile? Now, when we talk about tactile, we are talking about the feel, texture, how we can feel something in our hands. And what can we feel when we are talking about output? We were talking about display information. Well, do you know? Okay, I won't say it. I want you to think about it. What output device or what device can output any information that we can feel? We will get to that. When we get to that, we will all be surprised that this is what I'm talking about. So don't worry your head. Those who know it, put it in your head. We will talk about it later. So examples of output devices that we have are the monitor, the printer, the headphones, the computer speakers, projectors. We have sound cards, video cards, braille readers. Braille readers. These braille readers are for those of our siblings, our friends, our parents who have problems with their eyes. Yeah, they use the braille reader. So don't think when someone is having an issue or a problem with their eye maybe the person cannot see properly. You don't think the person cannot use the computer. Technology is far advanced. The person can still use the computer as you do. So those who are having issues with their eyes, don't be perturbed. Get close to the computer. Let mommy or daddy help you get a braille reader. We also have what we call the speech generating devices, which is SGD, of which I will talk about it. I know most of you are confused what a speech generating device is. Well, it's simply put, it generates speech. But how they do it, we'll talk about it. Then we also have what we call a plotter. Now, before I go back to anything, the speech generating devices are devices normally used by people who cannot speak. If you have not heard of this man before, Stephen Hopkins, one of the greatest scientists of our times, I'm telling you, he was a great scientist. If you don't know him, go and search him on Google, and I know you get a great amount of information about Stephen Hopkins. He was a man who was down by, I think, CMS, if I'm not wrong, cerebrospinal meningitis. So he was in a wheelchair. He couldn't move, he couldn't speak. So he had what we call a speech generating device. So when he wants to speak, well, I don't know really how it works, but what I know is he speaks through that device. And this device, when he's speaking, he speaks in a, you could know that it's a computer speaking. It's not a human being speaking. So these are what we call speech generating devices. If you have any issues, you can also go online and search for the SGDs, the speech generating devices. Now let's talk about the monitor. A monitor is simple, like our television sets we are watching from right now. They're very simple, like our television sets. That's what a monitor is. But there are two basic types of monitor we have. We have what we call the CRT. That's the cathode ray tube. The cathode ray tube. And we have what we call the flat panels. The flat panels. Now, the images displayed on the flat panel or the CRTs or our monitors are what we call soft copies. So whatever the information that we see, the information we can see but we cannot touch, we know it's called what? A soft copy. A soft copy. So remember, information displayed on our monitors is called what? Soft copy. Let's look at an example of the monitor. On our left, we have what we call the cathode ray tube, and on our right, we have what we call the flat panel. Now, the flat panel is more or less a general term. It's more or less a general term because under the flat panel, we can have the LCD type, we can have the LEDs, we can have the OLEDs. These are all types of screens that we have, or monitors that we have, depending on their make or what is used in making them. Where LCD is called what? Liquid crystal display. Liquid crystal display. And we have an LED, which is what? Light emitting diode. So this one also uses light to what? Display its content. Then we have the OLEDs, which is organic light emitting diodes. So these are all types of what? Flat screens that we can have, or flat panels that we can have. As I said, we mentioned what? The cathode ray tube. Now, the cathode ray tube is like the old television set that we used to have. I know most of you might have not met this type of screens before, or televisions before. We used to call them TV etikopo. Yeah, but it's quite extinct nowadays. We find it difficult. But there are quite a few numbers in town. Now, what they do is they project their images through a tube. Through a tube. So let me have a tube. So as they are projecting their image through this place, it is reflected on the screen. So just a tube which is reflecting what? The image on the screen. So it's very simple. We have our cathode ray tube and we have our what? Flat panels. Now, let me tell you one thing. The flat panels, when it comes to the flat panels, the LCDs are quite good, but they are not all that durable. The LEDs are also good, but one problem is they produce a lot of heat. So when buying any computer or any personal computer, make sure you are choosing one which is right for the room condition you have. One which is what? Right for what? The room condition you have. Because if you buy one which produces a lot of heat and you don't have, let's say, an AC, that's an air conditioner, please remember, what you are doing is you are damaging the screen. It will get to a time it will not last. It will damage early. Okay. Let's talk about the next one, because I mentioned that we are talking about two basic inputs and two outputs. And in the input, we mentioned what? The mouse and the keyboard. And the output, we circled the monitor and the printer. And I said the printer is more or less what? A peripheral. Because without it, the computer can run perfectly without any problem. It is the purpose of the printer that makes it what? Part of it. Now, let's remember, I asked the question, what device that when we use, we can feel within our hands? Or what output device outputs any information that we can feel? And I remember I mentioned that you know it when we get there. Well, for your information, it is what? A printer. Very simple. A printer. So a printer is what? An output device that produces or displays information. It displays information by what? Bringing out what? A paper or a sheet of paper with the information displayed on. And we can touch and feel it. That's why we talked about what? It being what? Tactile. When we are talking about the type of information which is outputted. So we talked about what? Text, pictures, and we talked about what? Tactile. So a printer can bring out what? A tactile type of what? Information. We can also have plotters, which can also bring out tactile, because plotter is also another type of printer, but this one is very big and huge. They are used in what? Printing huge images. Okay. The output of a printer is known as a hard copy. It's known as what? A hard copy, because we can touch and feel it. Remember, we said the soft copy cannot be what? Touched. It can only be seen. It's more or less like talking about software and hardware. When we talk about the soft, we cannot touch and feel it, but the hard, we can touch and feel it. Now, there are basically two types of printers. We have the impact and the non-impact printers. The impact printers and the non-impact printers. Now, these impact printers, what they do is they hammer on an ink on the wheels that will print on the sheet. So it's more or less, let's take an example. It's more or less like the typewriter. When you are using a typewriter, those of you who have not come across what a typewriter is, you can go online and check what a typewriter is. It's like a keyboard, but this time when you type, it outputs a paper. So more or less like a printer and a keyboard combined. That's a typewriter. Now, that's how the impact behaves. But we have the non-impact, which were more or less runs like a scan. So let's look at the difference between them. That will make it very clear. Now when we talk about the impact, they make a lot of noise. So remember, anytime you're going to print out something and you realize that the printer is making a lot of noise, start suspecting it to be an impact. I'm not saying it's an impact, because some printers might have been used more than necessary, so they have shaky parts. So please, any printer that makes noise, a lot of noise, and is slow in printing, no, and sometimes they move in steps, then you know that you are talking about an impact printer. So it's noisy, it is slow. Then you can talk about the quality of what the printout is. Low quality, is very low. And we talk about the price too, it is very what? Cheap. But on the other hand, the non-impact printer is quiet. When you are printing out, you don't hear a lot of sound. Even though there might be sound, it doesn't make noise. It doesn't make noise. And it is very fast. It's fast also. Then we have its printing quality to be what? High, of high quality. But remember, if impact is less expensive, then non-impact will be what? Expensive. Yes, they are quite expensive, but they are quite efficient. Now let's go to the functionality of an input and output. Now remember, we cannot single out certain input devices and talk about their functionalities. Then we will be doing more or less of a product functionality. But when we talk about input and output, we are going to look at in general what an output does, and in general what an input device also does. So the first one is an input device. It says it puts data into the computer. Very simple. Then we can say what? It accepts data in human readable form and converts it into what? Machine readable form. Simple. So the input's purpose is to what? Accept data in human readable form. That's when you type A, B, C, D. It's a human form. Then it interprets into the machine as what? Machine language or machine readable form. Now, and it's also what? It puts data into what? The computer. So basically, they are the same and what? An expanded form of explanation. Then we have an output. What an output device does is that what? It displays information. Its primary purpose is to what? Display information. Is to what? Display information. That means it output device transforms machine readable language to what? Human readable form and displays it. So it takes the machine readable after you have inputted, it takes the machine readable and transform it through processing with the help of the what? The system unit into what? A human readable form for us to be able to what? Interact with what? The computer. An output device gives us what? Feedback after data input has been what? Made. As I was saying, when you are typing, immediately you type A, it displays. You type B, it displays. Yes, that's that's how they operate. When you input immediately, the output must what? Give a feedback. When you click, the output must what? Give a feedback. And the output here, I'm talking about what? The monitor. And not the monitor alone, we have what? The printer. Okay. Well, with all that I said, I want us to go through these few questions. Let's take about 5 minutes to answer these questions. And the question number 1 says, list 2 common input devices. This question shouldn't even take you more than 5 minutes. They are very simple. It says, list 2 common output devices. And common over here can be interchanged with what? Basic. It can be interchanged with what? Basic. So you can say what? List 2 basic input devices and 2 basic output devices. Please, you are not limited to just the personal computer. We have made mention of a lot of input and output devices. even in your room right now, just look around. Look for the input and output devices and write them down as your answers. And we'll see where we'll get from there. Then the third question says, list two differences between an impact and a non-impact printer. So the time starts now, 5 minutes. So you should be getting done with the answers to the questions, going over the questions again, and after that we look at the solution. So we have list two common input devices, and as I said, the common can be what? Interchanged with what? Basic. Then we say what? List two common output devices. Then the last question, two differences between what? The impact and non-impact printers. Now our solution. The first question, two common input devices are the keyboard and the mouse. Remember, we can also talk about what? We can talk about the microphone, right? We can talk about the microphone and all other input devices. We can talk about what? The biometric scanners, the digital cameras, the keyboards. They are all part of what? Input devices. Then the next one says output devices. Two common output devices. We have the monitor and the printer. And I said that's not the only what output device that we can have. We can also have a lot of them. So we made mention of what? The computer speakers or even your sound system at home. It's part of what? Output device. We have our brailles, the braille reader, and we also have what? The plotter. And I said the plotter is a type of what? A printer. You can go online and research. You're not limited to that. Now the third question says impact, the difference between what? Impact and non-impact printers. Now I remember we said what? The printers, the impact printers are noisy. They are what? Also cheap. They are what? Cheap. They are noisy. They have low quality. Their output is what? Of low quality. And we can also talk about what? They are very what? Slow. But when we talk about the non-impact printers, then we can talk about it being what? Quiet. It being what? Fast. We can also talk about it being what? Of high quality. That's the output. The print output is quite of high quality. And we can also talk about its price, which is what? Expensive. It's what? Expensive. If you're able to get all these three questions correct, remember what I always say, you are a nerd. If you are not, don't worry. Nerds make mistake. And when they make mistake, they get up and do the right thing. So wherever you had wrong, just input the correct thing there. And let's go. So far we are coming to an end of today's lesson. What have we learned so far? Today we spoke about an input device. We said an input device sends data into the computer for processing. And we also spoke about what? An output device. And we said the output device does what? It displays information after it has gone through the processing. And we give examples of what input device on a personal computer. And we said the two main examples that we can give is what? The monitor and, the keyboard and the mouse. Then we have our output to be what? The monitor and the printer. And we remember, I said the printer is not part of a personal computer, because without it, it can still function. The computer can function. The printer is more or less a peripheral. Okay, and we also spoke about the functions, and we said the output, the input devices, they do what? They display information. And remember, the input devices sends data. So it's basically the same as its definition. We said that when a monitor displays information, what is it called? When a monitor displays information, what is it called? I can hear someone saying soft copy. That is correct. It is called a soft copy. And a printer displaying its information is called what? A hard copy. This is where we end for today. Till we meet again, I am Isaac Ohina Mankwa, your facilitator for ICT. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Joy Learning TV.